Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michelle Mackey, and as the President and CEO of Kids Forward, I am proud to welcome you to our state budget webinar. Before I begin, I'd like to thank my colleague and the manager of our Reimagine Wisconsin Coalition and pro-worker, pro-immigrant, anti-austerity policy agenda, Liliana Barrera, for co-writing my remarks today. Lily is in the chat to welcome you and share resources. Dahi Wolf, who works on early education and nutrition policy, is also helping in the chat. A few other logistical items that I'd like to cover with you all before we get started. All of the materials we're sharing today will be sent out after the event via email and will be available on our website. Lily will share in the chat a quick survey. Please take the time to fill it out before you leave. We genuinely want to know how we can best serve our community partners as well as decision makers. For folks who are joining one of our events for the first time, Kids Forward is a statewide, nonpartisan, multiracial, multi-generational anti-racist policy center. We advocate for systems, policies, and investments that support all families living in Wisconsin, not solely those with means and power. We gather here in what our governor has declared the year of the kid. But let's be clear, every year, every day must belong to the well-being of our children, families, and communities. Today, we will deepen our understanding of the governor's proposed budget, how it supports the year of the kid, and where it falls short. At Kids Forward, the year of the kid isn't just a slogan, but an invitation to build the Wisconsin that children deserve, that we all deserve. When we talk about government budgets, dollars, cents, we're talking about values, about how we invest in children, in the dignity of workers, and in the shared vision that nobody should be left behind. For example, we can't separate childcare from the hands that do the caring, nor can we talk about boosting the dairy industry without acknowledging the immigrant communities that keep Wisconsin's farms running. When we address youth justice, we honor the brilliance of young people over a system that too often mistakes potential for a problem. And if we're serious about educating our children, we have to address mental health because a hungry mind can't concentrate and a weary soul can't flourish. So let us commit to building a Wisconsin that invests in children, not because it sounds good, but because it is the foundation of lasting justice. Let us remember that a budget at its core is a moral promise, a promise that we will stand for children, workers, and for all the people who call this place home. Thank you for being here. And next, we will hear from the Kids Forward team, who will share some of our analysis of the governor's proposed budget. Then we'll have a chance to connect this work to the work of some of our partners in the fight, who were kind enough to join us today. Up first, we have William Park Sutherland, Kids Forward's Government Affairs Director. He'll share how the budget impacts health in Wisconsin. William?
Thank you so much, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. Like Michelle said, my name is William. I'm Government Affairs Director for Kids Forward. I am going to share two pieces about how the budget impacts healthcare, and then two pieces about how the budget impacts mental health care. Though the first one is sort of how the budget impacts everything. Wisconsin's budget, especially its healthcare budget, but actually the entirety of the budget, is built on federal Medicaid dollars. Medicaid is the largest insurer of mental health services in Wisconsin. More than 1.2 million kids and parents and adults and older folks depend on Medicaid for healthcare and long-term care. And without Medicaid, not only would those people have very little recourse for finding care elsewhere, but Wisconsin's entire budget would be thrown a kilter. Medicaid accounts for more than 1 out of every $4 of the state's $50 billion budget. So the governor proposed a budget that would help address maternal and child health, including targeting maternal and child health disparities, expand access to care in a number of different ways, raise provider rates, and start addressing the pervasive problem of lead in kids' homes, in child care centers, and in schools. He also proposes raising provider rates that are already too low. All of that depends on Medicaid's solid foundation. However, right now, Congress is considering cutting at least $880 billion, yes, with a B, billion dollars from Medicaid over the next 10 years. Any cuts to Medicaid would be devastating for Wisconsin families and children, and would have a residual effect of making it harder for Wisconsin to fund other things that are important, like good roads, solid public education, special education for kids with disabilities. You get the point. So that's kind of the overarching theme of the governor's budget for healthcare, is that it really depends on Medicaid. Medicaid's also called Badger Care in Wisconsin, although Medicaid there's about 19 Medicaid funded programs in Wisconsin. One thing that I really wanted to lift up is that the governor proposes to extend postpartum coverage for moms covered under Medicaid to 1 year. Right now, Wisconsin and Arkansas are the only 2 states that haven't extended this vital coverage. Federal law requires 60 days of coverage, but that is not nearly enough time. That's not enough time to even make all of a postpartum follow-up visits, let alone to address health issues that might arise. And we know that the majority of deaths of women postpartum occur after the 60-day period. We also know that Black mothers in Wisconsin are 5 times more likely to experience a pregnancy-related death than their white counterparts. Wisconsin this is a very bipartisan issue. Many lawmakers think that we should be doing this, and really one person is standing in the way in the assembly. So hopefully we can start to do the right thing and start to begin to address the state's shameful racial disparities in maternal and child health. I'm going to now move on to mental health and to give a picture of what's happening there. Thanks. So I want to highlight two things there, and also want to point out to you the importance of Medicaid in these as well. So the first is that the governor is proposing to invest $300 million for school-based mental health. So that's for mental health to be provided at school through mental health professionals and nurses and other folks. One very important aspect of this is that this would be distributed to schools through a formula. And so schools would have a reliable and dependable way to plan for how to provide mental health support. Right now, a lot of grants and other things like that are done through a competitive process. And so schools, even if they get funding for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, may not know what to expect in the next year if they don't win the grant. So having a dependable way that schools can plan to provide mental health support is really important. Also, in the second year of the budget in 2027, the governor proposes to send more Medicaid dollars back to schools for providing services. Schools provide right now, there's about $113 million that Medicaid supports schools. And so that's another thing that's at risk if there are deep Medicaid cuts. But the state takes some of that money and keeps it for themselves and then passes a smaller amount on back to schools to be reimbursed. And so the governor would recommend changing that. That would mean that $50 million more would go to schools. And so it would be easier for them to continue to provide services and to expand services. The other thing that we wanted to highlight is that the governor is proposing to leverage Medicaid and increase reimbursement rates for mental health and substance use services. I already said this, but it bears repeating. Medicaid is the largest payer of mental health and addiction treatment services in the country and in the state of Wisconsin. The governor proposes that the state Medicaid program would pick up the dime for mental health community-based programs like community support programs or assertive community treatment, which is in many, many counties throughout the state, but right now counties have to pay for it. So the governor would propose the state picking up that, and that would make it easier for counties to divert those funds to other services like community aids and helping Wisconsin counties invest in other things like housing, youth community aids, things like that. That would mean about $20 million more would go back to counties. He's also proposing raising Medicaid reimbursement rates for medication-assisted treatment to help more providers provide more services for people struggling with opioid use addiction. So I think I'm out of time, and I will pass it on to my colleague, Amanda Martinez, who is going to talk about immigrant communities in Wisconsin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, William. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Martinez, and I am a policy analyst with Kids Forward. I will now share about state budget proposals that impact immigrant families in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, undocumented immigrant workers paid almost $200 million in state and local taxes in 2022. However, despite these contributions, they do not have access to essential services and opportunities in our state. The governor's proposed budget does include numerous proposals that would expand opportunities for immigrant families. This includes restoring driver's licenses for all, which will allow for immigrants to go to work and keep their families together. It will also increase economic opportunities, keep roads safe, and increase state revenue. Kids Forward does advocate for any proposal around driver's license to include data protections for all applicants to make sure that data is not shared with outside agencies. If you are interested in getting involved in advocacy around driver's licenses, you can connect with Voces de la Frontera and join their coalition around safer roads. The state budget also represents progress towards language access. This includes funding to expand translation services among state agencies, as well as support interpreter services for staff in the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. The budget also proposes $53 million to support English learner students in every school district in Wisconsin. Altogether, these proposals would address language barriers by increasing access to translation and interpretation services to more families in our state. There are other immigrant-related proposals in the state budget, including tuition equity and professional licenses. I would recommend please check out our budget brief about immigration to learn more about these proposals. Thank you so much for listening, and now I will pass it to my colleague Dahi to share more about childcare.
Thanks so much, Amanda. That was really informative. My name's Dahi Wolf, and I work on the early childhood education issues at Kids Forward. And I'm going to talk today about childcare in the state budget. So first of all, I just want to say that, Kids Forward values, we envision a Wisconsin where every child thrives, and quality early childhood is really essential to that healthy development. And investing in our youngest Wisconsinites leads to lifelong benefits. I could talk for half an hour about all the research that shows, things that are affected by a quality early childhood education, higher graduation rates, longer lifespan, more home ownership. The list goes on and on. Our state has just refused for so many years to make any of these investments. So I'm going to say this twice because it's so important. Childcare is unaffordable and unavailable for way too many families in Wisconsin, working families that need childcare so that they can go to work. They need safe, reliable childcare. It is unaffordable. It's absolutely astronomical cost, and it is unavailable, especially in rural areas and especially for infants and toddlers. An example of the unaffordability, just between 2022 and 23, tuition rates increased by an average of 14%. I mean, that is at least 3 or 4 times the rate of inflation. So in terms of unavailability, 70% of rural areas in Wisconsin are experiencing an extreme childcare deficit, sometimes called a childcare desert. Also, the childcare crisis particularly hurts families of color. Why? Because families of color are hardest hit because they're more likely to pay a larger share of their income for childcare than white families in our state. Also, when you hear the legislature talk about wanting to grow Wisconsin and have a strong economy and have people recover from the pandemic and be able to go into the workforce, childcare is an essential part of that. A thriving state economy depends on childcare. And we are hearing that over and over again from employers across the state who are naming lack of childcare a #1 priority that needs to be solved to address the worker shortages that they are facing. So how does this relate to the governor's budget and the year of the kid? Well, there's basically a few areas that is prominent here. And I'd say the #1 one is the Child Care Counts program. This is an amazing program that Wisconsin was a national leader in during the pandemic in terms of using federal recovery dollars to make sure that our child care centers stayed open, that families could count on childcare so that they could go to work, and so that the childcare workforce could actually get some increases in their just pitiful wages. So that is the biggest thing by far. The other two that are in the budget that I feel like could make a difference are a new employer grant program that'll work with employers to offer things like on-site childcare and other family supporting services, kind of the way we do with the healthcare benefits, where you have ability to spend that money for your family's needs. And then the last one is improving our Wisconsin Shares system, which is our child subsidy for working parents who are under the poverty level. And that would increase efficiency. It would reduce the parent copays that families need to pay, and it would raise the child care reimbursement rates. We are ranked right now 48th in the country in terms of our reimbursement rates, and that needs to change. And lastly, I just want to give another shout out to the fact that, families need this, programs that are fighting to stay open need this, and childcare workforce are severely underpaid and they need support from us. Childcare is essential to Wisconsin's economy and to supporting our families with young children. And it's time we do the right thing. So thank you to the governor for putting these things in the budget, and I hope that they can move forward. You'll learn lots more in the chat or in a follow-up about actions you can take. All right, I am going to pass it now to my colleague Emily Mayotta to talk about taxes.
All right, thank you, Dahi. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Mayotta, and I'm the Communications Director here at Kids Forward. All right, so talking taxes, not the most thrilling topic, but it is absolutely vital. Taxes are how we invest in our shared future, fund schools, roads, healthcare, and more. But Wisconsin's tax system, it's been rigged for decades by the wealthy few, and it's helping drive inequality, especially racial inequality. The good news, the governor's proposed budget starts to flip the script. It gives real tax relief to lower and middle income families by asking the wealthiest Wisconsinites, folks earning over $1 million a year, to finally pay their fair share. These aren't people struggling to make ends meet. They're doing just fine. So let's break it down. First, the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC. It boosts earnings for low-wage workers and is proven to lift families out of poverty. It's already used in over 30 states, and the governor wants to expand it here as well. More help for people working hard and barely getting by. Next, we have the homestead credit. This helps with property taxes and rent for low-income households. The proposal by the governor raises the income cap to $37,500, and it indexes it to inflation so more folks qualify for relief and stay protected as costs rise. Together, we're looking at $1.1 billion in property tax reductions and nearly $240 million in tax credits for seniors, veterans, and working families over 2 years. This keeps property taxes flat for most homeowners and lowers income taxes for the middle class. Beyond what's on this slide here, the governor also wants to limit sales taxes on essentials like health-related items, electricity, and gas. Sales taxes are super regressive. They hit low-income families the hardest. Cutting these taxes is a big deal for families who feel every single dollar come out of their pocket. Now let's talk fairness. The budget introduces a new top tax rate for just the richest 0.03%, those earning over $1 million annually. It also closes tax loopholes and caps a manufacturing tax credit abused by high-income earners. That move alone brings in nearly $800 million that we can be investing into communities. In total, the changes raise a little over $3 billion, but here's the kicker. More than half of it, 60%, goes right back to Wisconsinites through tax cuts, mostly property tax relief. The rest strengthens public services like education, school mental health, some of which we just heard about, and a new Office of Violence Prevention. This plan is smart, it's fair, and it's overdue. It doesn't fix everything, but it's a bold step toward a tax system where working families can breathe a little easier and the ultra-rich can finally stop riding for free. So yeah, I'm going to turn it now over to my colleague Cartesia Weaver to share more on youth justice.
Thanks a lot, Emily. As Emily said, I am Cartesia Weaver. I'm a senior policy analyst here at Kids Forward, and I'll be talking to you all today about the methods that the governor has proposed to address our youth justice system in the state. So we know that every young person in Wisconsin really deserves to have the opportunity to get education, to grow up in safe communities, and to realize their potential. But however, the state really relies on incarceration to handle issues that really could be addressed by investing in youth's basic needs up front. So in Wisconsin, we know that protecting children means that we should be advocating against the reliance on youth incarceration. And we should be pushing decision makers to address the root causes of inequities that lead to youth incarceration, as well as removing barriers for justice-involved youth once they do enter the system and when they get out. So how does this happen? It happens because of very inaccurate and tough on crime narratives, which uphold wasteful spending and punitive policies, such as automatically processing 17-year-olds as adults. We know that Wisconsin is now one of four, it used to be one of three, but we had a rollback. Wisconsin is now one of four states that automatically processes 17-year-olds as adults. And usually when I say that, folks don't even know that that's a thing, but it is. We automatically treat children as adults in this state, and that needs to be addressed. And even as many states are moving toward decarceration, so taking youth out of prisons and investing in community-based alternatives and other means of addressing behavior, Wisconsin legislators have used tough on crime narratives to justify not pursuing meaningful policy change. So in the governor's proposed budget, he really attempts to do two things. First is to implement some common sense evidence-based strategies, such as raising the age to automatically treat 17-year-olds as kids. But we also see that he attempts to sort of snowball youth justice system reforms by investing in smaller, more regional facilities that will prioritize rehabilitation instead of punishment, and to bring youth closer to home. But oftentimes, this strategy is relying on investment into the adult system, which effectively means that we place our most vulnerable children in a position to be left behind. The two major proposals that I will uplift for us today are funding the new statewide Office of Violence Prevention and capping the daily rate at which youth in this state are placed into secure youth prisons. So the first, the governor proposed investing $12 million over the biennium into the statewide Office of Violence Prevention, which would take a comprehensive approach to violence prevention by providing funding for local efforts and developing public education campaigns and improving statewide regulations. This could be extremely meaningful for the state. It could help to fund crime reduction initiatives, to support safe spaces for youth, provide domestic violence training, and address some of our lacking firearm issues in the state. And the second proposal that the governor included in his budget was to cap the daily rate at which youth in this state are placed into state-run facilities. And so currently the state has two facilities that are extremely expensive to run. And the Department of Corrections actually asked the governor to double that rate from about $1,200 a day to $2,300 a day. The governor's response to that was to cap that daily rate at its current level, which would allow for the state to pursue the closure of those two youth facilities that they currently operate, and then invest in those smaller, more regional facilities. And so while these proposals have the potential to really make some meaningful change in the state, and we really appreciate the governor's commitment to addressing these ongoing issues within the youth justice system, there is still so much more to be done and so much more investment needed. So if you'd like to take action on this, I encourage individuals to contact your state legislators and ask them to support the initiatives that are included in the governor's budget, though they don't go as far as we'd like. They are a first step. And you can also attend your legislators' listening sessions to ask them to support these. If you're an organization, feel free to reach out to the Raise the Age Coalition, and we'll share that contact information with you all. And if you'd like to help Kids Forward mobilize for statewide policy change for youth justice, you can contact me. And I'll end my time with you all today with a quote from a participant in our Radical Listening for Youth Justice listening sessions that we hosted this fall, and just say that our children deserve their childhoods. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cartesia, and thank you for grounding us with that quote. That hit heavy for me. Thank you, Cartesia and Emily and Amanda and Dahi for offering us those short summaries of 5 issues that are in the governor's budget. This is just a highlight. As Michelle said, there are quite a few more. These issue briefs were not as brief as our comms director might have wanted for some of them. You can find them on our website, and you can learn a lot more about health and mental health and immigration and youth justice by going to our website, which I'm sure somebody's putting in the chat. It is my privilege to introduce and moderate a discussion now with 3 amazing panelists who will help us further unpack the budget, share what it could mean for Wisconsin kids and families, what's at stake, and what more needs to be done. Before we get to the panel, though, I'd like to say a little bit more about why we're here and why we're talking about the budget. As Michelle said, a budget is a statement of values. It's a ledger of who policymakers consider important enough to listen to, and to support with our state's resources. Taxes are our money, right? We all pay into the system. Those become taxes, like Emily talked about so well, and that's our shared resources. The budget is which services or programs are helping which people to get ahead, whose voices get listened to and whose are ignored. The budget is also, and maybe more importantly, an exercise of power. Over decades, Wisconsin's wealthy few have rigged the rules, and they've funneled resources from poor and working class communities into their gated enclaves. And they've used race and racism and fear to pit us against each other, so we forget what we're really fighting for and what we could have if we all fought together. We often use the word rigged, though. I think it's important to remember this system, I think, is actually working basically how it was designed. Power cedes nothing. It doesn't respond to challenges of morality or challenges of decency. It responds to more power. Organized people is power. Organized money is power. Although organized money might have a limit, like we saw last night. But knowledge is also power. I was speaking with a legislator a while ago, and she said something to me that I've been thinking about for a couple months. She said, one of the reasons the legislature gets away with so much is that so few people know it's happening and know what's really going on. That's also by design. Our colleagues read hundreds of pages of mostly legalese about what the governor is proposing. By putting the budget in plain language, hosting webinars like this, and bringing in this panel for a down-to-earth conversation, we're hoping to challenge that design. We're hoping to make the budget a little bit more accessible and recognize that if knowledge is power, when more people know what's going on, maybe more organized people can stand up and exercise their power. We are joined today by the collective experience of three amazing panelists who bring years of understanding and insight working with and advocating for marginalized communities in our state, whether that is kids who are impacted by the youth justice system, rural farmers and farm families, or parents and teachers working to make child care accessible and affordable. Please join me in welcoming Amanda Merkway, Advocacy Director for the ACLU of Wisconsin, Michelle Ramirez-White, Government Relations Director for the Wisconsin Farmers Union, and Naila Adama, teacher, community advocate, parent, and member of the Department of Children and Families Parent and Caregiver Equity Advisory Cabinet, though it is important to note she is here in her personal capacity and her capacity as a teacher today. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you for having us.
So the governor has designated this as the Year of the Kid. What are you seeing in your communities that could help, be helped by the investment in children and families? What do you think of the budget? What gaps exist? Let's start with Amanda.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I guess start by saying that, in a past lifetime, I taught middle school for a couple of years, and in a different past lifetime, I was a public defender for young people in delinquency and child welfare cases. And it's just really, I think, devastating that when I talk to young people and system players, these interconnected challenges in education systems and human services and youth justice, like, haven't changed a whole lot in a decade. I hear that we need high quality treatment providers that can provide like in-home and other accessible forms of services that meet youth and families where they're at. More family-based placements and therapeutic settings for kids that are placed out of home. Families also just need support meeting basic needs, transportation, housing, mental health care, so many things upstream that I think impact the issue of youth justice downstream. Greater supports for young people in school, which has a tremendous impact on their ability to thrive without being ensnared in like a youth justice system. We need meaningful alternatives to secure placements, secure placements like long-term detention programs at the county level. And like, I hate even, when I say the word secure placement, it sounds so like sanitized, because in reality, that means like a child is sleeping in a cinder block cage on a mattress that, as a former client described it, is only as thick as a pack of Kraft singles. It's like a mat. It's like thinking about like where they lay their head at night and the impact on not just like their mental health and their physical health and development, but how it impacts how those young people see themselves as a result of being placed in those settings. Back in 2017, the ACLU of Wisconsin filed a lawsuit to address the torturous conditions at Lincoln Hills and Popper Lake School, our state's type 1 juvenile prison, back when youth were subjected to incredibly long stints in solitary confinement. They were pepper sprayed indiscriminately. They were chained to tables, among countless other abuses. And well, the consent decree has led to a drastic drop in the population since then, and significant improvements in the treatment of young people at the facility. Then the legislature passes Act 185 that restructures the system to create smaller treatment-based youth justice placements closer to home instead of up in the Northwoods. It's now 2025 and Lincoln Hills still isn't closed. We have, as Cartesia described, like the new type 1, prisons in the works. We have secure residential care centers being built in Milwaukee and Racine, but taxpayers are currently spending $463,000 to incarcerate one child at Lincoln Hills for 1 year. Like, that's asinine. For perspective, my like back of the table or back of the napkin math, that's eight times the cost of providing a child with a safe apartment, utilities, a weekly private tutor, driver's education classes, weekly trauma therapy without counting it for insurance, fees and interstate travel for an elite sports club, and weekly music lessons for an entire year. It's also 40 times the cost of in-state tuition at the University of Wisconsin. So I think it's just bonkers that we have these like unbelievable costs that are, in addition to the profound human costs of youth incarceration, like the cost is borne by counties that can create these perverse incentives, or it's like the county's bottom line is what's driving the decisions, not what's actually best for kids and families. We should be doing everything in our power to prevent children from being tried as adults. We've a higher percentage of people incarcerated for crimes committed as youth in the adult system than any state in the country besides Louisiana. Like, that's unconscionable. But to stop more people from getting waived into the adult system, or to raise the age of juvenile court jurisdiction, it takes a significant investment. And so I think the governor's budget, takes a number of steps in the right direction, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Amanda. The visual of the mattress the size of the width of a craft single is going to stick with me. And just thinking about, Wisconsin is also, the only state in the country that's paying $200 million more to make sure that 90,000 fewer people have access to health insurance because we aren't expanding Medicaid. So just think about like the same idea, right? We are paying $400,000 a year to put children in torturous conditions instead of make choices that are less expensive and would let kids be kids. Yeah, thank you for that level set. Naila, can I pass to you with the same question?
Sure. Thank you so much, Amanda, for that insight. It just really hits home for me why universal basic income should be a thing. Yeah, I've heard, you're gonna hear me say it a lot. So being low income in America is a full-time job in and of itself. Being a low income parent, doubly so. Being a low income marginalized parent is ridiculous. When all those things intersect, like Amanda so beautifully put together, like the cost of that in human capital, in finances, is too great for us to not have universal basic income on the table. So I just want to start there. And while I love the way that this budget really interprets the needs of a child in a wide breadth, they talk about the mental health, they talk about youth justice, all of those things, absolutely. A healthy community is needed for children to thrive. So I appreciate that that is part of the conversation, but it is absolutely just a start to stepping in the right direction, and we need to keep that at the forefront. We have to be much more courageous in how we view these issues and how we address them. So yeah, I want to put that on the table. So while this budget is a great start, anytime I think about the gaps that exist in my community, I'm here in Beloit, through my 30 years as a parent, through my 20 years as an educator, and kind of seeing how it all comes together and plays out for the possible outcomes for children. I think about a particular parent when I was blessed enough to be part of a Head Start collaboration. And this parent had older children, and one of the teachers was like, one of her children would come to school all the time, exhausted, sleep through class. We were trying to figure out what's going on, because by how she presented herself, everything was going okay for this family. Found out later there's some domestic violence issues. Child was often awakened by arguing. Sometimes there was police involvement, oftentimes not. Mom couldn't leave because of childcare. If she left that situation, she wouldn't have anybody to care for her children. She was terrified of being homeless, been there, done that, wasn't trying to go back. The dearth of services for homeless people or unhoused people is ridiculous. So she didn't want to get in that situation. But eventually she realized that being jobless, that might lead to homeless, was better than being lifeless. So she was brave enough to reach out and get the help that she needed to leave the situation. And for a while, the child was able to come to school, had made some great changes, not exhausted, but then it started happening again. And most of the people involved with her just automatically assumed that she'd gone back to that domestic violence situation. But what was happening was, because she could not find childcare, that older child was not responsible for taking care of the younger ones at night. She'd set up a camera. She was doing everything she could because she knew that she didn't want to be back in the situation she had been, but there were just no resources to support her in the way that she needed. So anytime I think about the gaps that exist, again, that universal basic income, it won't solve all the problems, but it sure would have helped her out a lot. And we really need to start thinking about being more creative on how we address the needs of our communities. And again, I'm going to say it again, I love that they didn't, with this budget, it does take a wide breadth of what does it mean to have a healthy child and it's healthy communities. And we need to be looking at everything that that entails and how that all intersects. So.
Thank you so much, Naila. No, listening to you, I'm thinking about the trust that universal basic income would convey, right? And how little trust we have for people who are depending on public programs, right? We work reporting requirements for food assistance and, you know, multiple re-enrollments for things and making sure you check all the boxes, right? And then
exact right language so that people help you. It literally is a full-time job. Been there, done, full-time job.
In contrast, right, we give billions away, hundreds of millions away to manufacturers and to Foxconn, if you remember that, you know, with no strings attached, right? Because we just are supposed to trust those people, right? So, you know, just thinking about like who we extend trust to is another piece of the moral document, right? That is like what our policy landscape looks like. So thank you so much for pointing that out. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, so I work to represent the Wisconsin Farmers Union here in Madison, and we represent around 2,500 farming families here in Wisconsin. We're the second largest through Farmers Union general agriculture organization in our state and in our country. So the communities that I work in, or we work in, are largely agricultural based and rural communities. So when we think about things like childcare, which we've touched on here, and we work with Kids Forward on childcare related issues, farmers are among a class of people that do really need childcare and childcare resources, and has been touched on by Kids Forward staff, rural areas in our state are really experiencing these childcare deficits. But farmers in particular, you know, when we talk about farming and the history of farming in our country, there's often this idea that there's a family unit that stays on the farm, right? And so there's someone there to watch a child and help take care of that kid. And then once the kid's old enough to send to school, then they can send it to the neighborhood school. And that's just kind of the way it can function and flow on its own. But now we know, right, that through things like benefits and coverage for things like healthcare, farmers no longer really have the ability to just have a family member at home. So almost every farm is self-employed, and almost all of them don't qualify for Badger Care because of how Badger Care is allocated. So oftentimes they don't have healthcare coverage, and the need to get healthcare coverage comes from having a family member having that off-farm job. So there's usually a dynamic where someone has an off-farm job and then someone's working on the operation day in and day out. And that leaves very little family support to provide full-time childcare. So the need for farmers to be able to continue their operations and their businesses and grow food and support our country and our state here in Wisconsin is really integrally tied to the childcare system. And I don't think people think about that enough. So when we talk about these rural valleys, right, and the lack of childcare resources and the needs to drive hours at a time sometimes to get farming families' children to a childcare center, that takes time away from the field, from farming for food. And during a harvest season, that time, especially in a day, can be really, really critical to the bottom line dollars that family would bring home for their operation. So farming is already a really small margin business. So those dollars and cents and those hours during harvest season do make a really big difference. So we support the budget request to raise the childcare work wages and see the need to expand access. And we believe giving childcare workers a fair living wage is the first way that will expand access in rural communities. So we desperately support that aspect. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about our budget in particular with rural mental health care and rural healthcare in general. So I kind of touched on how childcare is linked to healthcare. So because farmers are self-employed and don't have healthcare coverage and oftentimes don't qualify for Badger Care, there's definitely a need for Badger Care expansion to cover farmers. So farming is, generally speaking, really a dangerous job, and they do need healthcare coverage, and many of them don't have that. Not having healthcare coverage is actually a huge barrier that we hear from our members as to why farmers are no longer in the farming industry and why their children are encouraged to go into the industry in general. Not having healthcare coverage in our today's society is really difficult. And I think farmers are among a protected class of people that were not considered in our modern healthcare system. So there really isn't a ton of avenues for them to get healthcare coverage outside of things like the state and federal government helping them. Things specific to mental health care for farmers is something that I really find important to uplift and talk about. So farming is, and the agriculture industry at large suffers from one of the highest rates of suicide in our country and actually internationally as well. Farming in general is a very stressful business. It's, hard labor and a hard day's work on your body, but it's also really stressful to think about you owning an operation that has been passed on from generation to generation, and you want to pass that on to the next generation. So there's a lot of internal pressure that you're putting on yourself to not mess anything up so that there is a business to pass on to your kids. And oftentimes there are exterior factors or third-party factors that come into play that might make it harder for your business to be successful at no fault of that farmer or no fault of their business planning. Things like markets, weather, tariffs, immigration, all of these things that are decisions that are being made from other people really do impact farming operations. And it's really hard for farmers to plan for things like that. So having support for mental health and the stressors that come with farming is really important, and we really do advocate for that. So specific to farming, the DATCAPS Farm Center, so the Department of Trade Consumer Protection, has the Wisconsin Farm Center, and we are requesting that they raise and expand the Farm Center's funding to $400,000. The center does so many important things to address farming stress, and it's a really specific place for farmers to be able to go. Farmers oftentimes need to be approached with a little bit of a different understanding than maybe other suicide hotlines would approach them. So we have a separate suicide hotline that's connected to the Farm Center, and they provide 24/7 wellness and support to farmers when they are experiencing a mental health crisis. And that can be really important, just to have someone to talk to that has an understanding of what you're experiencing, because they either grew up in a rural community, they grew up on a farm, their dad was a farmer, they understand what it feels like and the pressures that you're facing. And other things that the Farm Center does that you don't really think about around mental health, but are so interconnected and tied with farming, is things like financial consulting and transition planning. So if you're a farmer and you have multiple kids, it can be really stressful to think about how you're going to pass that farm on to the next generation without causing internal family strife. Things like mediation and arbitration. So if there is, mediation and arbitration. So if there's a time when a farmer is in contract with USDA, for instance, or a state government body or another farmer, then they can go to mediation with the Farm Center and they can help work that out, and other wellness and diagnostic approaches to help them address mental health issues and then get medication. So these things are really critical for farming communities, and we really like to see that be supported as well. And I'll pause there for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I can attest to the stressfulness of farming from my sister. Is a part owner of an organic farm, or not, I don't know, a farm in Massachusetts. And she definitely talks about the stress of, the land has been in her partner's family for generations, and that, really feels the stress of making sure that that works. In listening to you all, one of the through lines that I heard, which makes sense because I think it's something we all say, is the importance of actually involving the people that you're trying to help. Because actually, right, like Michelle, I hadn't really thought about, I mean, it makes sense, but I hadn't really thought about that our health insurance system that's built on a kind of large employer-based model of being able to subsidize care, right? Isn't thinking about farmers at all in that conversation, right? And it's just another example, because I think Amanda and Naila, you both shared how, the people who, even if you think the system is trying to help, right, isn't listening to what they need, right? And isn't trusting what they hear, even if they're listening, to Naila, your point around universal basic income. So I'm curious what you see as the biggest kind of levers for change, whether that is in this budget coming up, or it's a campaign that you have going, or work that an organization or a part of the government that you're working with is pursuing, or just sort of what is something that you're looking forward to, or that you think might have a chance for impact. And we'll just, whoever's moved first, please jump in.
I'll jump in because you articulated it so well. Having people with the lived experience in those rooms, I think we're doing better, but I think we need to make a more intentional effort to not be asking, will this work? But asking, are we asking the right questions? They need to be in the room from the beginning. One of the things I love about my work with the advisory cabinet is that one of our members is always asking, are we asking the right questions? So when I go out to my community and ask them for those listening sessions, when we're talking about childcare, are we asking the right questions? When we invite you to this space, it's not because we need to know if what our ideas will they work. You want to know what your ideas are and being genuine about that. Like I said, we're doing better. We have these lived experience academies, we have these different pockets, but we need to make sure that the people who are living these experiences are in the room from jump every single time.
Yeah, +1 to that. That's just like so critical, the like from the beginning part, because I mean, so often, I mean, I've seen state entities and local governments know exactly what they want to do. And then, we got community input, but it's always on the back end. It's always, not necessarily the most accessible forum. And, even if there's really like phenomenal critical feedback about changes, it's like either structurally too late, like not possible timing wise because of when the local budget, cycle is, or they've already taken steps to implement the plan but are pretending that they hadn't yet, is like the reality. And so I think it's just how do we push, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about like how do we push, I think, legislators in Madison, but also municipal and county governments to think about like what access to democracy means. One thing the ACLU, this time in the universe, there's a lot going on, and actions, I think, at the federal level and the state level impacting folks' civil rights and liberties and, basic needs are, in addition to trying to create this positive vision for the future, similar to some of the, proposals that are in the governor's budget, like we're still playing defense constantly every day. And it's really hard even just to play defense to like maintain the status quo so it doesn't get worse when like these opportunities to engage in democracy are so inaccessible. If you want to testify at a hearing at the Capitol, like you got to take off work, you got to find childcare, you got to get, find parking, get a parking ticket because they're going to schedule a hearing, at a time that is in the middle of the day. And then there might be a, long agenda of bills, and the bills that they know people are going to testify on are going to be at the end of the agenda deliberately so that people leave before it's their turn to testify. It's just like, it couldn't be more inaccessible. Even think about the state budget hearings. People are going to sit for 12 hours to speak for 2 minutes. Like it's absurd that is how we access democracy. And so I think how can all of us, help folks get used to emailing and calling, their state legislators, like looking up, here's who represents me on the county board, who represents me in the city council or, village board, like here's like, and get used to, sending an email, making a phone call, and where it's not scary, and you get used to it. So you're just constantly like lighting them up because they work for us, and we're not going to let their kind of deliberate attempts, honestly, to cut off that access to democracy, if we know what the future needs to look like.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think bringing people's voices to the table is so important. And I think within agriculture, farmers are less than 1% of our country's population and less than that in the state of Wisconsin. So having members tell their story and uplift their voice is something really key. And a lot of legislators don't have a background in agriculture and often don't understand the day-to-day stressors that a farmer is facing and the ways that they could potentially help through policy in the Capitol. So giving them a reminder of who these people are within their district and what their issues are and what they're facing is really important, because again, I think farmers are a little bit of a unique job now unless people have it, and so it's important for them to continue to be in the forefront of people's minds. And farmers, like was touched on, it's very inaccessible, and farmers are so busy and oftentimes can't take off even a day from work. And that's why it's so important to have people like us in Madison representing them and uplifting their stories and meeting with their legislators on their behalf as part of the union.
Thank you all so much. I also think about the going back to the whole, like, this is by design, even the party in power often, right, like does things as late as possible to keep the rest of the legislature out of the conversation, right? So like this is so intentional, where they're trying to hold a vote at 4 a.m. or, they're trying to like let a motion go to the rest of the committee with 10 minutes so that they don't have time to read the thing before they have to vote on it. And, all that kind of stuff. And just an example that a colleague of mine in another state shared, they were really excited about passing Medicaid reimbursement for doula care. And they had an advisory committee and they set it up and they released the plan, and they had no doulas on the advisory committee, and they created a completely unworkable system that at least they spent a while to create, and they had to redo it over again. And they were willing to redo it, but it delayed the actual benefit because they didn't start, right? They didn't start at the beginning. They didn't start by talking to the people. And I think sometimes that's really intentional, and sometimes it's right, they're just sort of like just going with who they know, right? And Neil, I see you look like you might want to jump in, so please do.
Sometimes, like you said, it's intentional. Sometimes people are just that's the way we've always done it. So we have to be really intentional about not doing it that way anymore. Writing it into policy, you will not start this until there's someone in the room who's lived this, who can guide us. Not who can give us feedback, but who can guide the ship for us. So I just need to put that in there.
That would be such a powerful procedural change, right? You're not going to do this until that's the step, right? You want to write a bill? Did you talk to somebody who's going to be impacted by it first? That would be really powerful. As we start to wind down, just wanted to give you, is there anything else that you want to share with the folks who are here joining us? And thank you so much. I think we still have 70 people who are in the webinar with us right now. Is there anything else you want to share before we transition to Q&A?
I did want to talk a little bit about another program that we are hoping to support in our budget. So the Wisconsin Farmers Union is running a campaign on the Wisconsin LFPA program, Wisconsin Local Food Purchase Assistance Program. And this is a collaborative effort between the Wisconsin Farmers Union, the DACAP, the Department of Trade and Agriculture and Consumer Protection, Marble Seed, and the Wisconsin Food Hub. And the program has been really vital for farmers in our state and underserved community members across our state by rewarding grant contracts to underserved farmers and bringing them into a larger market, and providing the growth and distribution of fresh and nutritious produce to those in need in food hubs and food shelters. So first, I would just want to frame this by saying underserved is actually a USDA definition. So historically, USDA didn't give farm grants to women, people of color, and people in the LGBTQ community for a really long time. So when we look at the current average age and who a farmer is in the country is a 67-year-old white man. And there's actually a historical reason for that. So USDA had put out programs under the Biden administration to slowly address the historical harm that had happened through USDA contracting in the past. And this was one of many programs that they had successfully done to bring in underserved community members and underserved farmers and connect them through federal support to strengthen our local food infrastructure. On March 12th of 2025, the USDA, under this new administration, terminated the local food purchase assistance program mid-implementation, and that will cause a lot of harm to both the 300 plus farmers that had scaled up their business to be able to provide this fresh produce, but also to many of the food pantries that will be depending on the food. So we as Farmers Union are committed to activating our membership to discuss this program and to hopefully support it in our state budget. So the governor did support it in his state budget, but the USDA also canceled the program after the governor released his budget. So we have a new state budget request of $2.25 million per year. I'll also share here in the chat. These are some of our farmers I don't know if it linked. I'll have to follow up. But I can share as well a link to the farmer profiles that shows who they are and to really put a face to the people that were growing the food in these local areas. Here we go. And we really see this program as such an important step for strengthening rural infrastructure, revitalizing rural economies in our state, and giving an opportunity for farmers that had been really successful in the program to be able to continue without partisan politics playing a role. So if there is an interest to advocate for the program, feel free to reach out to me after this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle, for calling attention to that important program. And when we were in our planning call, Naila was mentioning that, one of the food banks that she works with is, how many families that's supporting and how much, what the connection is between local food and farm food. So I don't know if you wanted to share more.
Yes, as I'm listening to everyone speaking, what I heard before is I'm a connector, so we can't keep living in the system where we forget that this is all so interconnected. Like nobody's doing well if the least of us is not doing well. So as actually the market is at my school. So here in Beloit, but we have a low income food school, and we have the food pantry that's accessible to everybody in our city. At least 70 families per week come in. And it would be a lot more if we were able to keep it open longer, and we don't have great transportation, but that's a whole other story. But the fact that our farmers is 1%, but they do so much. Like Michelle was saying in the chat, you can't have healthy communities without healthy food in a place like Wisconsin where there are farmers everywhere. Why is this a problem? And why aren't we supporting everybody like they need to be supported? Because supporting them supports us. So the interconnectedness of it all is.
I think that is a fantastic way to end our panel discussion. So we're going to transition to Q&A for all of us, but thank you so much, Amanda and Naila and Michelle. Really, I'm so blessed to be able to sit with you virtually and learn from your wisdom. I will transition to Aaliyah.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaliyah Stevenson. I'm the Deputy Director at Kids Forward. Please join me in thanking my colleagues and guests for sharing their expertise with us today, whether that's snaps, emojis, claps, words in the chat. Really incredible conversation. And we are getting ready to open up that conversation for some Q&A. So please pop your questions in the Q&A box below. But before we do that, we heard a lot of great takeaways. So let's make sure we take our learning to the next level and act. Want more information? Kids Forward has done a deep dive on many of the governor's budget priorities to let you know what the budget means to Wisconsinites. We've referenced them several times in the chat. We will be sending those resources in a follow-up email. You can also find them on our website. Please share them with your friends, your colleagues, and within your network. Also, let your voice be heard. Contact your legislators. You can find them on a link that we are popping in the chat. We talked about it. That is a powerful way to directly share your concerns. Also, share your story with us. We heard incredible stories. We heard about profiles. We heard about how critical it is to put a face and a name and a story to what's happening on the ground to Wisconsinites. Your story matters. Your story can change hearts, minds, and most importantly, policy. So we'll be sharing a link in the chat and afterwards where you can share your story with us. Also, want to stay involved and build your advocacy muscle? Please consider joining our Partners in Equity, a group of invested stakeholders who contribute their time and resources to working alongside Kids Forward to advocate for a Wisconsin where all children and families can thrive. And again, we'll pop the link in the chat for you. There's more action. In our next slide, we're talking about attending what we just talked about, one of those public Joint Finance Committee hearings. It's a long day. Others can't do it. If you had the time in the middle of the day to join us for this webinar, maybe it's you that need to join one of those conversations. You can see the dates and the times on the slide, and we will share those again. Can't attend a hearing? You can also submit your comments online. That is another option. If you didn't get all the links, don't worry, we're going to be sending them to you. And if you're thinking to yourself, that was just way too many options to act, and other folks are putting more options in the chat to act, please today, let's each commit to choosing at least one. Together, we can make sure that Wisconsin lives up to its potential, the potential that we talked about, the picture that was painted for us. We can do that. All right, so now we're going to move into our Q&A. Don't forget, if you're unable to join us for our Q&A and you need to hop off, please complete the short survey and let us know how we did today before you leave. For those of you who are able to say, thank you for submitting your questions in the Q&A box below, and please keep them coming. We're going to work to get to as many as possible. So for our first question, I am going to invite my colleague, William Park Sutherland, to join us again on camera so I can ask. The question that we received is, if Republicans reject the governor's budget outright and write their own as they say they will do, without all of these incredible items that we have talked about that invest in our communities, that invest in our children and families, what option does Governor Evers have?
Great question. So the governor can do one of three things. The governor can sign the budget that is presented to him that doesn't include many or maybe any of the priorities that we discussed today. The governor could veto the entire budget. And so if he did that, he would send the budget back to the legislature and they would have to try again, essentially, or if they didn't, then we would just continue spending money with the amounts that we have for this year. Or he could veto parts of the budget. So the governor has what's called a line item veto. And so he can he can veto certain sentences or certain words to try to make pieces of the budget fit a little bit more with his vision. So those are really his three options.
Thank you,
Yes.
William. And
Sure.
I think it's important for us to mention, like, this is just the beginning of the budget, right? Like, we have a fight ahead of us, a long-term fight, which is why we all need to be really active in making sure our voices are heard, because all of those options certainly are possible and plausible in the future. Thank you, William. The
Sure.
next question, I'd love to invite our panelist, Michelle, back. I think this might be a good question for you to consider. The question is there any data on the possibilities around urban community farming that have started in Wisconsin? Are there any funds in this budget that support anything that could make this impactful, specifically to Black and Brown communities?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Oh, yes. So there is urban farming occurring in places like Milwaukee and Madison. So we do have a Dane County chapter of Farmers Union that's been going on really successfully since the inception of the organization. And we recently started a Milwaukee Waukesha chapter. So us as Farmers Union has been getting more involved in urban agriculture, and we work really closely with Michigan Farmers Union's farmers in Detroit right now to like learn from them and gain some tips. But there's already urban farming occurring in Wisconsin. I can maybe look to some studies to share as a follow-up here. Things around food insecurity and local food support would support Black and Brown communities that need more food access. I don't believe that there is programming in the budget specific to urban farming or specifically earmarked for people of color. But I think at large, food assistance programming, things like Healthy School Meals for All, the food security initiatives from Hunger Task Force and Feeding Wisconsin, the Badger Box and the Tribal Elder Food Box. These are all programs that really do support and Wisconsin LFPA are all programs that support underserved farmers and bring in community supports around agriculture. So I know it may be not a perfect answer, but there are things out there that would benefit these communities, and we should definitely work to get programming for specific communities that need them. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I'd also like to pass this question to my colleague, Dahi, who does work in this space as well. So welcoming Dahi.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Aaliyah. I just thought I'd mention, because this directly addresses this question, this is not state funding, this is federal funding. But the Kids Forward is the co-state lead on a really cool USDA grant called the Lake Michigan School Food Innovation Hub. It involves the 4 states around Lake Michigan. So that's Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And one of our grantees is the 100-acre farm, which is in Milwaukee. And I'm putting that in the chat right now. Their project is called Bringing Fresh Salad Greens to Wisconsin Schools. And so they have an indoor hydroponic facility that does urban farming that's supported through this grant. And it would be lovely to think that there was state money as well to go for this, but at least for now, the good news is that grant has not been paused or canceled. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dahi. All right, moving to our next question. And I think I'll invite my colleague, William, back for this question to start at least. The question is, how might the state fill any gaps that might be caused by the cuts at the federal level? Are these being discussed by the governor and/or legislature as they propose their budgets?
Well, they're being discussed by me with them. Particularly in Medicaid, there are only 4 options for what states can do to respond to Medicaid cuts. They can dramatically raise taxes to pay for the exact same thing that we're getting now. So we can pay more for the same thing. We can cut services so that Medicaid pays for fewer services. So for instance, cutting out prescription drugs or cutting out residential treatment for opioid use addiction, or cutting out rehabilitation services. Or we could make it so that fewer people are eligible for those services. So we could make it so that fewer children qualify, or fewer adults qualify. Or we can pay less to providers for those services. But providers are already really not getting paid enough, and that would mean fewer services. So those are the 4 bad choices that Wisconsin has. And I'll continue with the Medicaid cuts because that's really what I know the most about, but these things are largely true of other federal support, but Medicaid is the largest source of federal dollars that come into Wisconsin. This problem, even if we solved it for like the next budget, this problem would worsen over time because the healthcare costs and public education costs continue to rise. And so as we have downward pressure from the federal government in cutting services and rising costs, we're going to continually be in this space where we have to do more or cut to meet the level. And so even if we fix this problem, Wisconsin has about a $4 billion fiscal kind of reserve or surplus. But that would be gone very quickly if we used it to kind of fill these holes, and then in 4 years or in 2 years, we'd have to do that again. So absolutely, Kids Forward and a coalition of other groups have formed the Wisconsin Medicaid Coalition that is talking to legislators on both sides of the aisle, talking to the governor's office, and talking to others in the administration about the potential impact of these cuts if they were to come to pass, and try to make people start to think about how we would address it, and also maybe help them feel motivated to talk to members of Congress, especially Republicans who are in the state house, talking with Republicans who control Congress at the federal level to express their concerns. Minnesota Republicans wrote a letter that said, "We're really worried about this, and we want you to think about that before you pass Medicaid cuts on to help pay for tax cuts for largely millionaires and billionaires."
Thank you so much, William, for offering those choices that we have. And I just want to mention there was a question about contact information. We will be sending all the resources and contact information after today's webinar, so everybody will have access to that. And without any other questions, I would love to move to just thanking each one of our esteemed panelists and my colleagues, and to all of you for joining us today to learn more about Wisconsin's state budget. Governor Evers, as we mentioned earlier, named 2025 the Year of the Kid, and Kids Forward looks forward to working on both sides of the aisle to ensure that this state budget includes every kid in Wisconsin, regardless of zip code, income, or race. Again, this is just the first step, an important one. We have a long road ahead. We hope you will join us. If you haven't already, let us know how we did by completing the short poll before you hop off. Your feedback will help us shape our offerings. Thank you so much, and have a great day.